Okay, I think we're going to begin. As you can imagine, there's lots of moving parts here, and because we have a hybrid event, and I will try not to stand in the wrong place. Okay, so welcome to the flipped classroom session. And I think actually many of you I recognize as having been in other flipped classroom sessions in previous years. So the intent of the flipped classroom session is that you will have prepared yourself with the background material ahead of time, and then we will have a conversation regarding the challenge that we've laid for this particular session. Oh, yeah. I'm going to, apparently though, a lot of you were not able to find the background material. Oh, yeah. Sorry for those of you online that we're just closing the door because lots of people are arriving late and there's noise outside. So apparently many of you were not able to find the background session, so we're going to try to fill that in. And the intent here is that you're helping us to figure out responses to the challenge. How can we use and shape AI so it benefits people with disabilities? And of course, that is a mammoth, huge challenge. And yesterday we had a keynote by Carl Grove, who talked about many of the potential opportunities that AI can offer us in this space. Today, I think we need to deal with both sides of it. That was a very optimistic view. There are, of course, also some harms and risks that come with AI. And one of the things to note, if as part of the background material, we talked about what are the specific risks. There's a saying that people with disabilities are subject to the most extreme opportunities, but also the most extreme harms of AI. And that's generally the case with most disruptive new technologies. They always bring both risks and opportunities. The one thing that is somewhat different with AI is just the scale of it and the speed of it, and the fact that it is actually biased against difference. So it's a statistical reasoning machine, meaning that it is attempting to find the average, the mean, the typical, the popular, the thing that gets the most attention, the thing that can be monetized the best. That is what AI is tuned for. And one thing to note about people with disabilities is people with disabilities tend to be different from the average. So AI deals with data. If you look at a data plot, the AI is aiming for the very middle or the top of the bell curve, and people with disabilities tend to be out at that outer edge. And AI is actually attempting to move everything into the center, which is a really good thing. If you're trying to become more average, it will help you become more average. Say the average thing, view the world in the average way, produce the average outcomes, etc. But if AI is being used by others to judge, filter, make a decision, or determine something about you, and you are not average, then you tend not to be in a positive position. The other thing is that AI works really well for people who are like average and who are closest to the average, and it works the worst for people who are unlike the average or further from the average. And so therein lies both the opportunities and the risks of AI. And one of the things we want to do in this session is to think about what should our approach be to AI? How do we push towards having AI benefit people who need it the most? So for example, one of the papers that you would have read is a paper about a large language model that is, and large language models are for communication and for producing writing and speaking and various products, who would require large language models the most, it would be somebody who's non-speaking perhaps, and somebody who has very limited movement. So they have a hard time showing you what it, in fact it is that they want to choose to say. And some of the attempts at using AI or large language models with them are to try to push those large language models to address the needs of those individuals. One of the things that was discovered there is that while it worked quite well in helping people say the average typical thing, they also lost their individualism, their quirky way of saying, their humor. They became this average, very typical person in their utterances. So those are some of the things that you would have discovered in the background material. And we're hoping that we'll make sure that all of you can access the background material. But what we want to do in this session is discuss what are the plans, what are the actions that we can take, how can we frame this in such a way that we advocate, push for, create policies, do experimentation and research to shift AI in such a way that we're reducing the harms and taking advantage of the opportunities. And the way these flipped classrooms work, we have me as a facilitator, we have two provocateurs, the wonderful Bianca Wiley and the wonderful Angelica, and both of them are going to give a little bit of a background into where they're coming from and their attitudes towards, or what they're passionate about in terms of this topic. And then we're going to open it to discussion, because the intent of the flipped classroom is this is the time for you to contribute, to think about, to ask questions, for us to collectively try to work out something that we can do with this particular challenge. So I'm going to turn it over first to Bianca and then to Angelica. So Bianca, do you want to take the mic?
Certainly. Yeah, certainly. Thank you. It's so nice to be here, and I want to thank the organizers first and foremost for creating a space where we have this luxurious time to think together about hard things that I find are in some ways being addressed too quickly. So I do really want to say, I know by the end of this session, we might want to have some ideas on how to leave here and do something about these issues. But I'd also offer that a lot of what I've seen in the law and policy circles are replicating historical things that haven't been working with other technologies, with data, et cetera. So to give you a little bit of where I'm coming from, I'm joining you from a neighborhood called Parkdale, which is in Toronto. I look at the work that's led me here in sort of 3 chunks of time. For the first chunk, I worked in the technology industry. I worked at a startup in Toronto. It was eventually bought by a multinational company. And so for 5, 6, 7 years, I did tech support. I worked in operations. I worked eventually as a product manager. So I have one chunk of experience in making technologies and working with them directly. The second chunk of my career, I ran public meetings. And so where Yuta is standing, I would stand at the front of a room and tell everyone, I'm here to run a process, to get advice from you to a government. I have no vested interest in the outcome of tonight's meeting. So I worked for years very procedurally to help get advice from a community of people to their government, primarily in cities, working on issues, urban planning, transportation, parks, libraries, all kinds of different things. And then the last chunk of my career, which brings us to here, was sort of bringing these two things together in understanding if and how technology can and can't support democracy and how we live together. And I've worked a bit with data, open data, worked with government technology, software, in recent years doing advocacy and thinking about how governments in particular bring technology into public use and how we can try to assert more control from a democratic perspective over the uptake and use of technologies. I'm going to end by saying that AI has been I really have despised working on. I've worked with and on this topic for the last maybe 3-4 years. I'm losing a sense of time. And it has been really hard to figure out how to approach it for me. And I would say I'm turning a little bit of a corner right now, which is good. And I'll offer two things. The first one is that I think when we made data, we being national governments globally, made data an object, which we thought we're going to have laws around in Canada, privacy laws and data protection and other laws, we might have made a mistake, because by turning relationships into something that we try to manage in an object, we have really gone narrow on a very technocratic approach to governance, which is to try to say how we manage this object, how it's used, how it's comprised, that somehow we're going to come to equitable and fair and beneficial governance. I don't think that's true. And so now with this AI, we're almost doubling down on the idea that you can take an object and call it a something and then do politics in it. So this has been very difficult because I think that gets a lot of the reality of life out of the way and makes us think, oh, there's a product here and it's, you know, something that we can set rules around. But I think the real governance of any technology resides in the people around it. And so I think today we're really going to be focusing on the relationships, the context, the specificities at a small scale of what it is to use, maintain, not use, refuse, shape, steer a technology like artificial intelligence. And I think I'm not sure that we should regulate math. A lot of artificial intelligence is advanced statistics. We don't have laws for math. So I think we really need to ask ourselves, does this even pass logic tests? I'm not sure it does. And I think the reason that we regulated data and now AI is fundamentally driven by the market, to have a harmonized way to move money. First it was data and now it's money in the shape of AI, all of it money around. And if we think that anything will ever supersede the primacy of that intent with law, I think we're making a mistake. And if you look at history, the reason for all of this regulation has been to enable innovation and trade. Everything else was secondary. And we knew in Canada in 1998, 99, 2000, there was an effort to bring human rights as primate, like as sort of the prime directive of how we thought about how data should move around. It didn't work, it fell. And so I think we have to be honest about that history. So yes, AI is new, but I think the politics of data point us to a lot of errors. And if this wasn't working well with data, I don't think it's going to be working better with AI. So that's what I'm, as Donna Haraway, I love this saying, to stay with the trouble. I am staying with the trouble of AI, but I am happy to share in these challenges with everyone here and to think together, because I think we have to think differently than we've been thinking about technology and governance in the last few decades. Angelica, I'll pass it over to you now.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone in Austin. My name is Angelica Seeschaft-Berres. I'm a professor in industrial design, in inclusive design, and foresight and innovation at OCAD University. And I'm also a settler and colonizer, and want to acknowledge that I'm standing on stolen land right now here in Toronto. And as OCAD University, we acknowledge the ancestral and traditional territories of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, who are the original stewards and custodians on the land on which we stand, create, and explore AI and other challenging topics. So allow me to offer this land-based acknowledgement. Similar to Bianca, I would say I'm a stool on 3 legs. My background is in industrial design and creating large-scale sculptures for international artists. So my background manifested and created the big scale between expression, site-specific work, and mass production in the industry. I used to do a lot of office furniture, ergonomics, and so forth, with all the shortcomings. Chairs not working for a lot of us, nor making our lives or backs better. And that allowed me to work with a lot of people, both at a very local scale and at a very international scale. And where I found the biggest space for innovation was actually in middle-sized companies that were tethered to the space that they are, that the kids there drink the water, next to which the industry reside, because that brings a different responsibility into what you make and how you make products. I'm talking mostly chairs right now, and I'm a stool, which is really funny. So there we really learned how to use less materials, less water, less pollutant, because it immediately impacted the neighbors around it, the city, and so forth. I then moved to Canada, to Toronto, to step into my academic career, because I thought, okay, chairs are not, or mass production is not what I want to continue with. How do we shape the future of design and designers themselves, so we become very responsible and maybe not driven by all the technologies and materials and abundance, the thinking of abundance, but how can we approach that differently? And that sparked my interest in local production, and how we can actually leverage sustainability on the material aspect, technology aspect, social aspect, and economics, so that we kind of like try to create a closed loop system that benefits the space where we are together. And with this exploring of products, the Design for One came into the picture. I worked here with a school with kids with disabilities and their teachers, trying to create materials and objects that support learning, but also physical disability, and increasing growth and capacity, and having objects reflect that. Then 5 years forward, we are dealing with AI, and as Jutta mentioned, communication is at the core of all our relationships, and AI is now, in particular large language model, play such a large role in which and how we communicate, how our voices are cancelled, amplified, and synthesized maybe to a certain degree. And we are working on a project for people that are not speaking, trying to develop an open system that removes some of the communication barriers, and training a language model that can hold the space for identity, for personal expressions, in a technological space, which is very difficult. But we are here to explore, and I'm very grateful to be given the opportunity, through government grants and so forth, to carve out that space that resides outside of industry, to allow us to explore what we can do together. And I'm really excited to hear from you how you approach this space of AI, both the opportunities and the risks. Thank you.
Thank you. And one of the things we wanted to do with the flipped classroom model, and why we have this role of provocateurs, is I've been talking in this space for like 44 years or more, and it tends to be we're talking to the converted, right? We're already, we all are sort of on the same page, and we frequently repeat the same messages to each other. And so both Bianca and Angelica come from other backgrounds. So adding some fresh perspectives to this, provoking us to think beyond the narratives that we are constantly retelling each other. So, and it's wonderful that we have two other perspectives that sort of stretch our thinking in this space, because we do have a political situation, a civic engagement situation, we have a design situation. So bringing together a number of strengths and other views of this really, really difficult problem is something that we need to do to be able to move forward. So I would now like to open it up to, first we'll start in the room and perhaps we'll go online. What thoughts do you have on this space? What questions do you have? And yes, Rob. And we're going to use a mic so that we can. Yeah.
This is Rob. So I just wanted to add in a little bit of lived experience. We were talking earlier about some of the downfalls of AI. In my before I got my present position at Metro, I was looking for 3 years doing different jobs, and off and on I would disclose that I was disabled. It was kind of a flip-flop. One time I would, one time I wouldn't. Then at one point I read that the artificial intelligence was actually taking that and determining that I wasn't fit for a position before a hiring manager even saw my resume.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so that's, and this is very much the case. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in the US found that over 90% of organizations, do you want to take the mic? Were using some form of AI hiring tool. So whether it was to send out, who do you recruit? Where do you post the positions? Determining that, but then also, especially for competitive positions, they would use an AI to filter to say, these are the 10 people you should interview. And that was based upon data of successful applicants or successful employees prior to that time. So they would use data, who did well, who was most productive, but then it became even worse in that a lot of them also allowed the employers to tune the filter. So you could say, oh, well, this is my favorite university, so I would prefer this, or this is the profile of my favorite employee. So look for somebody that matches this. And of course, the optimization systems are, what's also happening is everyone who's working in a facility is giving their data. So if you're using Microsoft Office, if you're using Viva, if you're all of those productivity tools, that data is going into the system. And so the system is getting better and better at finding the people that are a match and eliminating the people that are not a match. So we are all, if we are employed, contributing to that discrimination that's happening. And yes, any anomalies would actually filter you out, so you wouldn't even get a chance to make it to the interview process, which is quite unfortunate. There were different jurisdictions. The New York City had both regulations against surveillance, and they also had regulations regarding not using AI hiring tools. But that the surveillance regulations were didn't have very many teeth. So all you have to do is to disclose that you are using surveillance and how you're using surveillance. But most employees don't really have a choice to opt out. It's just they're being informed you are being surveilled. So that whole system of hiring is getting worse and worse. I think there are a number of and some of you here in the US may know of some of them. There are some states that are trying to address this. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was given executive orders to not do the type of intervention that they were planning. One of the unfortunate things, though, that was in the recommendations that they pulled just at the last minute was not to disclose, to take away the data about yourself that would identify you as having a disability, like an interrupted work history, so you don't put it in your CV. But of course, that then means that we're homogenizing that data pool even more. And so there will be even less acceptance or inclusion of the things that make your work profile less like the average. So we're actually contributing to, and the other thing to note is that our data is very entangled. And as there's more surveillance and we have more detail about who is optimal and who isn't, that you can't just remove one thing because it affects everything within your profile. But this is a really good challenge part of this. I mean, that's a great topic that you brought up, Rob. Rochelle. Yeah. Right. And that is a very common experience when we're and having been grappling with this for many, many years. I think the place we need to start, and Bianca talked about this a little bit or alluded to it, is this within community, within the local, and growing something bottom up from our own interests, as opposed to this top down being a particular design, a particular set of values, and a particular set of optimizations being handed to us. So can we grow from the bottom up some efforts where we provide a different view of what is intelligence, what is actually helping us reclaim some of the values that supposedly AI is supposed to be offering, or other technologies like social media are supposed to be offering, but they're not really. I mean, is Facebook the way for friendship? Is Uber the way for sharing? Is, you know, or Airbnb the way for sharing? Those are very made very superficial. Can we reclaim some of those values? Is there a strategy that we as a community? Carl yesterday said, this is an amazing community, and there is, I mean, there's a lot of strength in our community and certainly a lot of determination and resilience in our community. How can we use that to go through this or find a place through this overwhelmingly huge and pervasive set of things that is biasing against difference? And of course, in this political climate here in the US at the moment, it is overwhelming. But Bianca and Angelica, do you want to offer anything to Rochelle's concern?
Could you share a summary? I think I was going to see if I could read, but I didn't get to hear what Rochelle was saying. I'm guessing.
Oh, she was
Angelica
saying
had
it's
the same.
so overwhelming. She doesn't know where to start with this challenge.
Yeah. Well, I have one thought, which it comes from this idea of when you run a democratic process, you have to be honest about what's on the table for a community to decide and what's not. And I think because artificial intelligence, large language models, the infrastructure, you know, the cables, the servers, the data centers, they're all private infrastructures for the most part. There is some public investment, but by and large, we're talking about a handful of corporations who are not going to want to give outsiders product manager roles. And so I would say one place that I point to here, I think from a point of pragmatism, is that we as a community of people, we can govern how these things are used with a lot more power and authority than how they work. And I'm not saying we should just give up on how they work or accept them, but I do think that we have a lot more authority and control and power in our lives around them. And so thinking about how we use them, and I brought this, and then I'll just make mention, because the last time Yuta and I were talking, I think at this event last year, we mentioned Ursula Franklin's work, and Yuta said, oh, I want to talk about the earthworm and preparing the soil for change and paradigm shift. And if we really believe we need to paradigm shift, and I believe we do, and get out of a lot of the extractive growth approach of capitalism to date, I also think we have to look at where our power sits. And I would say it sits much more in areas outside of the market and the kind of ungovernable places of how we treat each other, how we relate to each other, how we set norms, how we set practices and standards informally, I think is where our power is much higher. And so I think I'll end by saying that I think a lot of the inevitability that we feel, this overwhelm, I think it might have at least partially been created by our reliance on laws and our reliance on policies and our thinking like, oh, it's regulated. Oh, there's standards. Oh, and it's like, okay, but that has left us with so much that wasn't addressed. And so I think flipping this around, going to the earth, going to the soil, going to the place of the earthworms, preparing for our change, we really need to leverage the power we have that dictates use in context in very local places. But I want to be so clear that I don't mean let's build small AI or let's build community AI necessarily. I'm talking about, and not that we shouldn't do that, but around that, we have a lot more expertise around making decisions that come from shared values and pull on, I think what Yuta was speaking about, this long arc. How do we respect our elders and all the work they've done that brought us here? I think we have to pull on values and the history of the work that's happened, and that's happened from people and how they've come together. And I don't think we have a technical solution for this problem, is where I'll end. So I go to people and small. In my overwhelm, I go to what are we specifically talking about with proper nouns in a specific use, and then work from there rather than from the top and from the big corporations, because I just think there's a lot of theater in engaging with some of the way that they frame these conversations.
Thank you, Bianca. And Angelica, do you want to chime in?
Very shortly, I think it's not the technologies we need to be afraid of, but it's the ecosystem that has been created around them. We feel we don't hold the technical capacity of navigating, challenging AI because we feel and we are told it's something that gets fed to us by companies. And I think we need to break this fear or myth around technology just being for the experts. I think like that's one of the big piece. And then, as Bianca said, the other piece that we are having, or this pillar that we want to rely on is policy and policy regulating AI and technology and us. But we are serving large corporations by adhering to these big pillars, castles that we fear we shouldn't enter. But if we think about AI being communication, communication is something that we do every day. And we have the choice of words, we have the choice of access, we have the choice of expression. Maybe it becomes more tangible that way, but we also find ourselves in a space that is highly populated by our communication space is highly populated by technology. So my chat history is tracked and so forth. Not sure if I can offer something, but maybe can we together throw off the AI by inserting different texts into what we write, and have a little bit of torpedation of the language models in there? Do we need to become very aware writers and use our expression of words also to counter what the AI tries and loves to track about us, and in turn serves the industry?
Monica, yeah.
Hi, okay, hi, I'm Monica Heckman. I love this topic. It's great that we're going to be able to dig deeper into this a bit. I'm interested in conversations around data as currency. I think the corporation seems not really here. Data as currency. Companies have been talking about data as the new currency and way of trading in getting customers' attention, getting customers to buy their products. And they've been doing this for very, very many years. And I'm not sure that all of us who so freely click on, yep, I'm giving you all those, right? I'm giving you all that data, see ourselves as being empowered to own our data, to having like that reciprocal conversation about my data is also currency. And I wonder if, how do we do that? How do we, as the givers of data, feel empowered that it doesn't matter, where our data is just a drop in the hat, and I want that thing that you're giving me, but am I aware enough to know what the power imbalance of what you're giving a corporation is so out of whack. So, data currency, is that something that we can educating ourselves about, empowering people to believe that they have value in that space?
Bianca, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I think if we think of this one along a spectrum, it's interesting because there's one piece where you can imagine a big sort of like consumer, this is like Ralph Nader era, like consumer protection, consumer rights, like sort of a growth and an understanding and a collective response, and a higher order sort of like group awareness of what we're doing and negotiate better for the value of what we're sharing. But on the other end, and I think like this is where I don't mean to seem, I think the fight right now in our emotions, I don't know about everyone here, but like I'm never being cynical, but I understand how cynicism and nihilism are like pretty rife. Like there's a lot of like, I just need to get through the day. And I say this as someone who grieves that fact when I see democracy. It's like, it's been very hard to get people out to meetings as long as I've been alive. And so I'm always thinking, how much time, how much energy, how much interest do people have in their governance? And this is why doing it with some representation sometimes feels just pragmatically required. And so the other side of that I would offer is, do we want to fall down that, I see it, I think, as a bit of an edge where like we're so atomized right now that just to have general solidarity seems challenging along old historical lines, that like sometimes I think like even if we could, and theoretically I could see a good argument to try to like come together more collectively on this issue. The pragmatist in me at this point in history is saying that this is going to be a difficult place upon which to build solidarity. And I think where I do see more benefit right now is in the ways that we're realizing what we want to protect, as common as what it is to be human. Like I find it interesting that AI is actually getting us to talk about consciousness, which usually is kind of sequestered into either super niche philosophical domains or spiritual. But what we're talking about is like, wait, like what do I want? How do I want to exist in the world? How do I want my unique voice to be heard, or how do I make sure I'm not getting like squished, as Yuta as was talking about, like sort of getting narrowed to the average. And I think that strategy has less to do with data, and it has more to do with like, I keep coming back to use, like what are the places where we want to interject? Like, it's like, wait, you're using data to make which decisions? And are we okay with that? Like trying to complicate that trade, I think, is where I'm like, just to offer. And as I said, I'm really stuck with this stuff. So I'm not saying this is necessarily helpful or gonna do anything, but I do feel like, it's hard to imagine people having the capacity to engage in the sort of consumer vendor frame. And so I'm trying to think like, okay, if that feels like a stretch, where might we? So those are my thoughts, because I could see how we could try to go for that. And then I also look at this world and I think, oh my God, we're not even, like, it's really hard to find where we are all feeling like we're living in the same place. And I feel like a bit, as I mentioned, nervous about putting our politics into technologies when they feel to be really bad outside of technologies more broadly. But that's all just in response and in conversation with what you shared, because I'd love to be able to feel like we could improve that relationship in that trade, but I struggle with it.
We have another question.
Hello, Randy here. I wanted to agree with Bianca's, you can't really legislate math. That really resonated with me. So should one of our goals, because it also resonated with me that, hate the whole concept of, hey, do you realize that your data is being used in this way? I didn't realize, probably should have, the comment that Rob made, that if you indicate you're disabled, that just puts you on the out list. From the funnel, you're removed from the funnel, bye-bye. So should that be one of our goals, is to figure out the places where we want to educate? Because you can make damn sure I'll make sure that point makes it to various places in my network. But what else do we want to surface that feels something containable for this kind of session? Just my thought.
Thank you for bringing up an actual action item. So building awareness in the community regarding, the implications of what are happening and what choices we still have and how those choices impact how AI performs or is used on us. One thing I wanted to say to Bianca's point about not working in policies or specifications or standards, I think just because of the relative size of this community and the diversity and the variability of this community, because of course, disability as a community is something very different from almost any other community, in that if you are Black, or if you are a woman, or if you are any other protected group that requires, that is being discriminated against, then there are huge commonalities, right? The qualities that are being discriminated against are common. And so you can use policy, you can use standards, you can use a variety of different things to say this is how it should be, and there will be agreement. But the miracle of there being a disability community is that everybody needs something different, and yet collectively there is a movement, there is a community. So we have an even greater challenge, but I think when I talk about AI, I talk about the opportunities and the risks. The other side of that coin is, okay, so sorry, I'm not articulating this very well. We have a huge challenge because we're all very different, and yet we're coming together. I think the opportunity is in that diversity. I mean, we have a better reason to push against AI than any other community, because what AI is tuned to do is to actually get rid of the diversity. But diversity, of course, is the thing we need mathematically or biologically or from any other logic model to actually survive as a society. So getting to my point regarding Bianca, I think we need to also use diversity in how we approach this. I don't think we can reject any of the strategies. So yes, community, yes, looking at influencing our politicians, influencing in whatever way we can, whatever small niche or leverage point we can get. We talk a lot about what are the levers that we can use. Well, I think we shouldn't reject any of the levers, knowing that they may not work, but they may work, right? So that at different times, I don't think there's any one response to how to address this. And that may be why it's so overwhelming. But I think as a very diverse community with very different strengths and very different needs, we can collectively launch a very diverse campaign to try, or not campaign, or effort, attempt to address this. So the policy people in our community, the advocacy people, the technical people, the mathematicians, we all have something different to contribute. So how can we collectively understand the values that Bianca is talking about, but take a variety of different approaches?
Yeah, and if I may, I can't see if there's hands up, so I don't have to, but if it's a good
Yeah,
thing to
go ahead.
I just want to say that I think diversity of tactics is always the way. So law, yes, policy, yes, standards, yes, like all of that is there, and that infrastructure needs to be pulled on, because it would be a mistake not to. But what I do want us to be cognizant of is that, and I think there's this really neat piece of writing that I'll share into the notes about cast iron pans, which is also, funnily enough, relates to Ursula Franklin. It's these great lectures. But basically, technology isn't just impacting us in a one-way hit. We use it, and then it's actually changing how we go back out into the world and use it and relate to each other. And the cast iron pan example is fascinating, because I don't know about all of you, if you have a cast iron pan or not, if that's something that falls within an option, if you're cooking or not. But if it does, in the last 10, 15 years, there's been this massive spike of like, do you use it this way? Do you use soap? Do you not? Do you cure it? Do you wash it? Do you not wash it? And forums, overflowing forums of how you do or don't treat your pan, to the point that I said to my brother, who also, we share a pan, I was like, I was being careful about how I used this pan, even though it didn't make a lot of sense as to why I was doing that. The point is, technology, in the way it's abstracting in some cases, is getting us away from practical experience. And the way that you would learn how to use a pan is to use the pan. And when it works well, it works well. And when it doesn't, you ask, what did I just do? And why didn't that work well? And what this points to is that there is an abstraction now where we're beginning to lose some trust in our own capacities, because we're constantly doing a referential thing where we go and check online, or what did someone say, or you like something that someone wrote and you're immediately checking, did they say something bad too? And it's a loss of trust. And I'm saying all of this because I believe that, because since the internet went mainstream, we have relied on these international and national frameworks to harmonize around markets and around accessibility, all of the good. It has consistently reduced our own confidence to engage with this topic. And I deeply agree with this idea of the education piece, critical. And I deeply agree with the idea that we have to go and start to find the places that we can act. And I think this lack of confidence, and exactly what Angelica was saying about the idea that this is a domain of experts. I watch people all the time say, I don't want to look stupid, so I'm going to be quiet. And in that quiet, the dominance and the status quo, they just steamroll everything. It just keeps going. So I do think it is educational. And I do think it's not a factor only of course, we keep all of those things, but to also potentially understand that those things have further reduced our confidence in ourselves to say, this is a bad idea. I don't need to write you a 400-page critique. If this is just clearly a bad idea, and we need to say as a group, we're not doing this, or flip the script. And what I do with politicians as elected representatives that I don't give up on, I don't go tell them what to do. I ask them what they're doing. You want to roll this technology out through our entire public service every point you can where no one asked you to do that? Please explain to me how you're contending with these well-documented harms. They do not have good answers at this moment. So I'm reflecting always on the fact that this is a very new paradigm. Internet post is 30 years. Democracy, we're over hundreds, right? So I do think we need to understand that while those technocratic functions matter, policy matters, law matters, standards matter, compliance matter, all of that, I also would offer, if you look around you right now, there's a massive disenchantment with science. There's a massive disenchantment with experts. And there's a reason for that, is because you got a lot of people looking at the world and saying, you've had your time with us, you've had all your numbers, you've had all of your rational thought, and my life is not looking good. So now we're going to go a different direction. So I just want us to be honest that in that sort of backlash to some of the technocratic, I think there's fertile ground. And right now it's not organizing too much politically to a collectivist, constructivist thing. It's like a refusal of science. So I think there's a point to intervene, but I've worked in all of the technocratic spaces, and I deeply believe that we have a cultural problem right now that far supersedes the technocratic problem. I don't think we're lacking knowledge. I think we're lacking incentives to operate differently. So how do we operationalize what we know already? Everyone in the room here knows what a better life would look like. And that's not the problem. And I think what you just said, we can talk to each other over and over at the same points, but how do we address that the incentives aren't there to make those changes? And I think that's a much more cultural problem and obviously a hugely capitalist problem.
Yeah, and just to add to your points about democracy and science, of course, each of those are currently reduced to majority rules, right? Which is the same as AI. So we have science, we have democracy, and we have AI all pushing against the minorities and the outliers. And so but in part of why there is that reduction is because science and democracy have become defensive. And when you defend, you lose self-critique. And that's when you reduce and you figure out what you want to defend. And unfortunately, I think people with disabilities are the collateral damage in that defense, because we've been abandoned in the attempt to protect and defend democracy and to defend science to some extent. But that may be a very yeah, go ahead, Jean, or oh, sorry, yeah.
My name is Tina Dutino. Thank you for this. You guys have all touched on a couple of things, but I wonder, we're talking about, you know, how do we move forward, how to deconstruct some of what we know today. I think one of the challenges that we have when we talk about disability, we still have this notion that disability is for this smaller group of people, this 1/4 of the population in Canada, as we know. But disability is about everyone. So I guess my point is, how do we get aging to kind of help us mobilize this movement, right? I mean, we are a bigger community than just those of us who identify as having a disability on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, changing the perception on disability, changing the understanding that disability is, yes, there are complex disabilities, and for some, disability is our identity, but disability itself affects so many more people, and we can. You know, we talk about intersectionality, but there's also aging that comes into play. And how do we bring those individuals into this conversation to influence this change that we're talking about?
Yeah, and this, of course, is a common narrative within our, so it's about not just AI, but about accessibility and any of the things we're advocating for. Yeah. But of course, yeah, the again, we bump up against diversity in that, and when we bump up against diversity, and that's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, because any diversity is also triggered by or is harmed by AI. So just any uniqueness, any variance from the majority or the average is targeted, and therefore potentially another group that can help us defend this. Jean, you were.
Hi, on my way in to this classroom, I bumped into a friend who said he had submitted a paper for this session. And I noticed it wasn't there. So I asked him to send me the link, and I would try to bring his ideas into the meeting. And this is Adrian Roselli, who wrote a article called "No, AI Will Not Fix Accessibility." And one of the key points, and the reason I'm raising my hand right now, is going back to what Jutta said about the levers that we have to pull and push. And I think a very important lever that we have as a community is whether or not we will allow AI to become the way that accessibility is evaluated in websites. And Adrian's point, and it's an excellent article. I'm going to try to figure out a way to get it to you all. But what he says is that when you copy broken patterns, you get broken patterns. And part of what we are dealing with in accessibility is inaccessible tools, inaccessible browsers, inaccessible basic frameworks that other things are built on. And we need to, when AI is saying that these broken patterns are the right way to do it, we will never fix accessibility.
Right.
And so for us who have the expertise, who have the platform, who have the gravitas, who have the respect in the industry, need to be speaking up more, that we cannot use AI to evaluate whether or not a website is accessible, because the AI is not being trained on patterns that are accessible.
Yeah.
So that the last part was my riffing on Adrian's. I didn't think that was his, but I certainly recommend that people use it, read it. I'll try to drop it in the notes. Is there a way for me to get it into chat, or?
Well, there should have been a way for all of you to get the background information. Rochelle can help us with that.
So
Yeah, it doesn't project to the room, it projects to the Zoom.
I'll louder into it. Got it. Okay, so there are links to Google Drive, and I will go ahead and put those into the announcements in the. I'll ask them. I'll get them into the announcements for the actual Slack channel. In the notes, I've added the article that Jean is referencing, and I think there's also the notebook pieces links back to the read. So I'll take care of that. Just keep an eye on the Slack for the announcements over the next 10 minutes. And then I did also really briefly want to respond. So one of the key questions I have that is, how do we, the ability to train AI? Like, I don't think someone else is going to do it for us, but how do we get empowered to do the training?
And Angelica, do you want to take that on?
I just caught the last end of it. Like, how do we train ourselves to feel empowered?
No, how do we become empowered to train AI?
How do we become empowered to train AI?
So that,
That's
one of
a
the,
big one.
a little bit about um, what we're dealing with, and the article is very correct, is a very, very polluted data pool. As I said, it's sort of a cesspool of everything that is out there. So it's sort of like, how do you clean the ocean, right? I mean, we have to some extent the same scale of what we need to address. And the training the AI, if we're using these large foundational models, means we do have to, yeah, we're dealing with a polluted ocean. How do we make that drinkable? It's probably we're going to have to do a lot of work to make it drinkable, and we can't do it at the scale of cleaning the entire ocean. We need to break it down into pieces that create chunks of it that are drinkable. But I think, Rochelle, to some extent, what that means is building AI literacy, AI awareness, and getting people to understand that we do, to some extent, still control AI, not or people do in general, largely these large companies. But are there pieces of it that we can wrest control of, and can we, as users of the AI, demand or ask for a greater personalization, greater diversification of it? Jean, yeah. And then Rob, you had.
I also think on a very practical level, that we could start guiding the companies that are actually training the AI toward a pool of, these are examples of good.
Mhm.
And for us to start maintaining, I don't know, maybe we could maintain a list of, these are good accessible websites that you could be training your AI on. We could identify those. We could be speaking and particularly writing, so that we're providing the text that AI can train on, of this is the right way to do it. This is the good part.
Right.
That we can, I mean,
Yeah, but
I'm ripping off the top of my head, but I think there's real practical things that we as experts can do that could help with this problem. So I
Yeah,
still have hope.
yeah, but of course, the optimization routines are not guided by what we think is right, right? So to some extent, when you I completely agree with you, but I think the point that pointing it to the large companies, I'm not sure how much that will.
But we can do something about DQ.
Yes, that's right. We can.
There's a lot of AI that's being implemented in our industry that we
Yeah.
can do something about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree.
So what I was gonna add to that was 2 words: lived experience.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, we could use these websites are good examples, not just the websites, but how the users actually interact with the material.
Mhm.
Opt-in, but I would think like something where if they wanted to anonymously contribute their usage patterns into this pool, so that the AI could actually see, hey, you know, this is something worth looking into.
Yeah. So one positive trend over the last little while is that rather than these very, very large Gen AI language models, there is a push, not just by our community, but by other communities, towards smaller, curated, narrow AI agents, where things can be salvaged from the large foundational models and then tuned and optimized. And personalization, of course, has 2 sides to it as well. There's the personalization that narrows your view, doesn't expose you to alternatives or diverse perspectives, which unfortunately is how personalization has been used in the media. But there's also the other side, which is personalizing in such a way that we increase the diversity of the way things function and can be used. So that given that there is already a trend towards individualization and personalization, tuning to your optima. Perhaps we can push on that particular lever.
I've got a couple things. Oh, and Angelica, go ahead.
Yeah, we
Um,
have one question from, and then yes, we should go. Go ahead.
Hello, Randy again. I wonder if there's some opportunity because prompt engineering is the thing, right? So if you're dealing with a large language model through ChatGPT or what have you, you can say, please draw the positive examples from your data from these areas. So is there some usefulness in, if you're going to use AI for a given accessibility use, here are some suggested prompts, which is something that occurred to me that it's not just the models, but how you engineer the prompts on the models.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there might be some opportunity, maybe there are some reasonable prompts that we can suggest to the community. Just a thought.
Yeah, definitely. Although, of course, the AI is pulling from, yeah, that is one of the strategies, changing the one thing we can contribute is what are the optima that the consumer or the user is wanting. So the prompts also help to shape the AI.
As users, it's easier to affect the prompt and the LLM.
Bianca, you had something to add.
I did, but I've gone a lot. Angelica, you want to go first?
I think on the question of the AI, I mean, the AI life cycle has various stages, and there are 6 stages. Problem identification, requirement analysis is the first one, and then data collection and preparation. And I think there's more model training, model development, evaluation, deployment and integration, monitoring and maintenance. We never see a death of AI, which is shocking, by the way. So what do we do with models that don't work, do harm, and so forth? But to your point, or to the earlier points, one of the speakers had said, I think in each of these development cycles, people with disabilities need to be employed and need to be part of to draw upon their, as stated, or one of the speakers in the foreground stated, the lived experience. Is there a way that we can mandate tech companies to create, or we mandate that people with disabilities, lived experience, are part of not just being consulted with, but proactively working alongside developers, programmers, and so forth? Is there a way we can get that agency and the need for diversification to the root of the AI development? And I think like there we are speaking about policy. I'm not sure if people in the room have examples of that. We are currently trying to do this in one of our projects, but it's very, very difficult. Any thoughts from the public, or Bianca, maybe, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, and of course that came up last night as well, that we need the tools to be accessible in order to participate. I think the life cycle that you mentioned there is what I call the second generation AI. It isn't the large language model, because with the large language models and Gen AI, there isn't actually a problem statement. It emerges from the data, right? And the values and the optimization emerge from the data. In the second generation of AI, where we had neural nets, yes, there was probable definition, there was gathering of data. And I think to some extent, in the trends within AI itself is that we're going back to more of a hybrid model, where it isn't just the Gen AI or the large foundational models, but gaining more control over, I see that as a trend within agentic AI and narrow AI, etc. And so since we're changing, or since there's a shift, is this an opportunity to say, okay, if we have this shift, let's make sure that the tools that allow that shift are also accessible? Is there a moment here or not? I don't know if anyone that has been playing with AI a lot can talk about that.
I want to say one thing first, which I hope we can all laugh for a minute, which is that Rob, I believe in the front row, has been sharing. I can't see if you can see that your computer screen is visible to people on the stream. And I'm only laughing because it would give me heartburn. I can't see anything on your computer in any depth, but I want to just flag for you, and maybe you know this, or just, yeah. And I'm saying laugh because sometimes I project anxieties onto others that no one was having, and I'm alone here having that feeling. So I hope, I don't know.
You can't read it, Rob. It's so small.
No, you absolutely can't read it. But I'm saying, like, with me, it's stuff I sharing my screen even on a thing gives me. Anyway, that's just as a human to human, Rob. The thought I was having as we were talking about this in terms of like, maybe we can engage procedurally or engage with the companies, it does bring me back to this, like, I feel a bit that the technical is the magician's hands, and it's the thing that if we get mired in, we look away from our sources of grounded structural power. And, the companies will be nice until it doesn't affect their bottom line the right way. And then they're not going to be so nice about X or Y or whatever. And there's also, I think, a big danger in capture, which is to say, well, this group said that this was good for community. And then you get into an intra-community debate about whether or not this is actually done the way that would, suit everyone's purpose. And then you're on a very shaky surface internally, and I would say in coalition and more broadly. So for me, those are all just both, to me, these are just like realities, and also doesn't mean that they're not things to try. I am the fan of trying all the things, and I also try to ground that with, like, how did this work out before? And I don't feel good about trying to work on the surface of a for-profit corporation for things related to rights and power. I just, like, it's not, they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders that supersedes any commitment they make formally or informally to anybody else. I know we all know this, but I say this because expectation management, which is to say, do it for the results, and. So to me, the and that I turn to, and I'm sure you've heard this is where it's kind of fun and also feels like I feel a bit silly not being within community for a long time. But to me, there's a flip of this question, which is that, like, the way that the disability justice thinking and community and the work within this community make AI better for everybody, which echoes in cities. There's this movement called 880 cities, which says if you make a city good for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old, it's going to be fantastic for everyone. And there's a arrogance in urban planning, which is a highly technocratic field, which just doesn't want to think like that. And I have seen this in practice, and I can say it, that technocrats are of the highest order in urban planning, even though it all sounds very human, and everyone here knows the accessibility battles that have been fought on city streets and sidewalks and everything else. So I return a bit to the cultural, which is to say, where are the points at the micro and the minutia of relationships where we need to bond together and say, both within community and broadly in coalition, you're not going to automate that thing over there. This is not this piece of the workflow, whether it's about accessibility websites and saying that we need the constructivist version of that. We need to build more of the good ones, not train the compliance machine to make mistakes eventually. And then we have to go hold it accountable in a court of law that's going to happen in 11 years. So I am sort of trying to turn a corner in the political thought right now. And I'll end on this point with a great book that's called Elite Capture. It's by a philosopher named Olufemi Taiwo. And what he talks about is that there has been a capture of representation. So the people who organize a room or the people who organize a corporation can decide because this is the weaponization of lived experience. is to say, okay, we're going to centralize on this, and this lived experience matters. But then there's a vacuum of what the construction is, that the project that everyone's arcing toward. And so I'm always thinking, how do we hold these things in balance, that we're building the things that we want rather than playing mitigation and defense so much? But we have to do both. So I hope you hear me offering this with a yes and. Like, it's not that none of the things I said don't get done, but it's also, how do we point toward this 880 cities, this version of like, no, everyone's concerned now about, I shouldn't say that's a universalizing silly statement, but in the world of work, there's a whole bunch of people suddenly concerned about, wait a second, can I work here? Is my job something that now isn't going to be available to me? Am I going to face discrimination because of my skills or because of how I approach work? And so to me, there's something in here with the solidarity building around what is it that we're trying to protect that should be part of this conversation that's different than a technical conversation.
Do you say to that, Jean?
Now taking notes. But
Oh, and
I give that a big +1.
and Monica, you have. And then I'm just wondering, we do have online participants, and we haven't had any hands up. I just want to say to the online participants that feel free to contribute as well and ask questions. And maybe Moema, you might have some comments on what we've been talking about. Okay, go ahead.
My brain is trying to process everything and make something make sense come out of this, out of my mouth. But I'm thinking about purpose, and you tweaked something in me, is that people that are working inside of companies are looking for purpose. They're looking for meaning in their own work. And what I experienced, so I worked at a bank, and I worked in just the software group, and in design. And I would regularly have people coming to me, and they would say, you know, the story that we heard, the impact that we're having, that I could have on accessibility in the lives of other people. I see myself, I see my family, I see my children, and I see that by working in this capitalist world, building this this software and technical, I too have a purpose, and I can be the one asking the questions. I'm empowered to ask the questions. Why are we doing this? Or shouldn't we be doing this another way? And then that brings meaning as well to people, that slowly, one question at a time, you know, one person having the, I don't even want to call it courage, because it shouldn't be courageous, but people talk about it as courage, saying, why are we doing it this way? You know, when you speak about perhaps not just the technical skills, but the implications, I think there's real power in advancing that and those questions, and perhaps some of the training that we're talking around about accessibility could be critical thinking about it, as opposed to you have to, like, right now the training around accessibility is very specific and technical, and isn't always relevant to like the job function that somebody is working in. So how do we encourage people? As Carl said last night, you need to be the leaders and the thinkers, and critical in your work.
And Moema, you added a comment to the chat. Do you want to say something regarding any of the current points?
Oh, hi. The comment on the chat was that was referring to the computer screen thing. I was also feeling, because Bianca was saying like, I'm feeling a little anxious. And I was like, I feel the same. I was having the same feeling by sitting here and seeing the screen. Couldn't see anything as well, but yeah, I was sharing the feeling. I don't know, the last thing, I'm not sure who was speaking just right now, but
It was Monica.
Oh, okay. Hi, Monica. I'm just thinking about accessibility and trainings, and everything made me think a little bit about a couple of things that I've been encountering in the work as well. I work with media at a college here in Washington State. And I feel too that there is a lot of things that are more technical that are taught in terms of accessibility and other things to our students and student workers. And I also feel that there is a lot of limitation in how to deal with different abilities or disabilities, or how to navigate it all, and the soft skills too, I think sometimes get lost in that. And these are all thoughts, right? Like we've been discussing and trying to figure it out, how to be able to make it more inclusive and access in a more broad way too, with everything we've been doing. And another thing that we've been noticing, and I don't know how to connect with it all, but the younger kids who came out from high school from COVID, even the way they're communicating with each other, or the fears that they have, like when sending an email is scary, and when they do it, they feel so, I don't know, happy that was something that they couldn't do, and they managed to do. It's like reach out to somebody that they. So all those things made me, like everything we're talking made me think of the place I've been working and people I'm dealing with, and not only how they should to deal with the students, but how we can better ourselves to support them as well. That makes sense.
Yeah, and unfortunately, one of the things when precarity happens, when you feel precarious in your job, I mean, the necessary courage, I don't know, I think it's probably this dipping line where you don't have the courage when you feel precarious, but then you reach a point where, oh, to heck, it's all going to, so I might as well do it. Well, it'll be interesting to see what workers do with, especially workers within the civil service or here in the US or within research or any of those things. How is the current political climate going to affect people? Will they, this is enough, no more type of, will they reach that stage? That's a very good question. Yeah, Peter, yeah, you haven't said anything yet.
I feel that precarity. I haven't said anything because I feel that precarity. How do I open my mouth and where do I put my foot in it? I was thinking last night what Carl was talking. Well, he's talking about the improvements that AI can make in things like prosthetics, actual physical improvements. And I thought, well, how can we use AI to make us better thinkers, better people, and who is controlling it? And then all the talk here about, we start with the polluted ocean, and Bianca's talking about the polluted technocratic system of urban planning. And now we have the federal workers, and the workers do have to seize the means of production, which means begin at the beginning to make a new kind of AI, or how can we steer the building of AI? I understand it. To build new models of it, or alter the way models are built, so that it's not just the same people with the same capital building slightly different versions of the same idea. So that we have to think about really beginning from the start, beginning from a new point of view, which is what we're doing in accessibility.
the work toward creating accessibility anyway is constantly trying to shift the point of view away from something that's historic, built into society. And AI is just another example of that. It's maybe a much more benign and insidious example of that. So untangling it is, and because it's moving so fast, does that offer us a window into change rather than because rather than having it just pass us by? It's moving so fast, but it's still in what feels like an infancy to me. Gives a chance to start to shift the way it's thought about and created. And I don't have the answers to any of those things, but that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, physically, I think Randy and then Jean. It's easier to shift to something that is already in motion. Physics point, yeah, I think Randy you had, and then Jean.
So Peter, I think what you were saying, those of us who are old enough to remember when Netscape was the thing and everything was going to be. Is this a similar, yes, I'm old enough to remember when people still use the links browser. Is that what you're saying? And there's an opportunity here since we're kind of on the ground floor to affect something?
Yeah, I don't see any other way
No,
forward.
right. I mean, Peter just said he didn't see any room for, yeah, I mean, the web became the web, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody uses links anymore. I think somebody still maintains it, but I haven't tried to use the thing for many, many years. Yeah, I think, unfortunately, I don't have all the answers, like, you know, but I think there is some opportunity.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
just trying to find the answers is a big problem. You know, all
That to the point in history when we went to GUIs and yes, and abandoned it.
well, there was a bunch of fear around that then too, but we're being.
Yeah.
So you had to ask a question a while back. And something that Peter said clicked in my head about we are starting to make the transition from large language models to agent AI. And I think that does give us an opportunity. And I'm noticing that I am somebody who immediately jumps to solutions without a lot of other discussion about it. So just feel free to ignore this and put it in the back of your mind for later. But I think there is an opportunity for people in the disability community to start requesting agents
Mhm.
and to start building the demand for agents.
Mhm.
And I'm also thinking about the aging community, which I'm entering or am well established in, and how much I need in the way of agents. And I think there is an opportunity with agents. I think we've lost the large language model, quite
Yeah.
frankly. I mean, except for the narrow ones being developed for specific purposes, like evaluating accessibility. But for the ChatGPTs, you know, we're not going to do anything about them. They're too big, there's too much money, we don't have the levers there. But we do in developing agents, because this is a brand new field, these are brand new companies that are starting up. And I think this is something that we could pursue. And I don't know, I want to put it on the solutions.
And Randy, you have a response.
What would be an example of an agent? I think I agree with you. I just like to think in use cases. So what would be?
Okay, 1 second. Yeah, we need a mic. So I can repeat. Yeah, so Randy was asking what would be an example of an agent? What would we ask the agent, or what kind of agent would we want? I think it's, well, I think it's very personal. I mean, it would be all of those very, very diverse things that we need. I think not settling on, you know, a singular set or a singular agent, which of course, though, then gets into the,
I was trying to.
So a colleague of mine, has cognitive disabilities and is very easily triggered by very specific things that are prevalent in social media,
Right.
that the algorithms love to throw in your feed.
Of course.
And she written AI scripts to purge her social media feed. So she never looks
Yeah.
at her social media.
Yeah.
She looks at an AI agent that she has built that says, don't include anything with these trigger words, don't include any advertisements, don't include any of this, that, and the other thing. So that's an example of an agent.
yeah. And what I would say is that we need to get around the economies of scale problem. So the answer to what are the agents, I think, is that we need a diversity of agents, that there aren't any there's not a hierarchical set. It shouldn't be governed by economies of scale. And that whole scaling and impact metric that is required to do anything in this space, I think, is something that we should say that that's not relevant here. We are very diverse. We all need different things. So give us the opportunity to personalize ourselves and the agency to be able to fit it to our particular requirements.
And that's exactly what agents are supposed to be doing.
Exactly.
I mean, the hot things happening in AI right now is very much personally controlled individual agents. So I think we have an opportunity. I'm so glad you got me started thinking about that, Peter.
Okay, and we're 4 minutes out into our break already. Sorry about this. The timing slipped from me. We're supposed to take a 15-minute break and then come back. And I think there is coffee and snacks just through the. Where are the coffee and snacks? Yeah. So there's a table there with coffee and snacks. So before it all disappears, so we'll be back since it's 10, well, online people will be coming to the second part of this at 10:15. So we'll be here at 10:15. We may give you a few more minutes to come back. There will be a few people that are still entering as we begin. To recap what we talked about in the first half, actually, it would take a lot to recap what we talked about in the first half. But I think we ended on the conversation of agents and the opportunity to push for greater diversification in terms of the strategies. So not to adhere anymore to the economies of scale in terms of how things are designed. But of course, that's a fairly optimistic view. We talked a lot about data and about the technocracy that is there and how it is in many ways designed to not meet the needs of people with disabilities. We talked about politics and community and a whole variety of things. And I think we did have a note taker that somewhat captured it. But I think none of the conversations were resolved. Many of them were still up in the air and given as proposals. So none of those conversations are closed as yet. We were in a sort of a brainstorming, getting a feel of the strategies that we could use, and also expressing some of our fears, hopes, and orienting where AI was in the accessibility space in terms of accessibility battles that we've been, or disability advocacy battles that we've been fighting for quite some time. And I think if we had to summarize that, it's that AI is basically amplifying, accelerating, and automating things that have already been happening in this space. And so we need a different framing. We need a way to bring in new perspectives. And anyone in the that participated in the first half can add something if I completely garbled that.
No,
Okay.
I think that was great. I just want to offer to maybe bring us back to something that was maybe midway, and I think it was Monica said this, but I might be getting this wrong, about working in an institution, organization, I think it was a bank, and having a sense of purpose. Like how do we, and how being able to support accessibility in one's role can really create more of a sense of purpose. And I think like, I just want to offer, because I think you just set the table so well with like what I'm here, like how I arrive here is not really part of this community. I want to offer something that I think matters, which is fear. Because I think we're really living in a society that has significant fear, and it's mounting in terms of, there was a few comments also about like being scared to speak, being scared to step out of line. And this has been identified as an issue with how technological systems, again, pulling from Ursula Franklin's work, really engender a compliance and control sort of culture. And so, because I know I really liked because I was muted, but I was saying, yes, it is courageous for people to speak up and figure out what do we do. So I think toward the productive ends of this gathering and how do we shape AI so it benefits people most, with my deep pragmatism, I'm thinking, how do we pull on all our pre-existing institutions, all the roles, all the work? And I think I just want to offer that like this idea of, instead of writing requirements or compliance or rules, maybe jointly working into this educational arc, questions. Because to me, that feels so much lower stakes when you work somewhere and you ask questions rather than assert positions. And I just want to end by saying that like, and I've seen this in different books, Ursula Franklin being one. John Ralston Saul wrote a book called Voltaire's Bastards, which really looks at the technocratic problem we live in, which is everything is rational, no decisions can be made otherwise. It's become religion to be rational. Silent Spring, Rachel Carson's work on climate. Unsettling Canada, which is a work about the history of Indigenous activism in Canada and advocacy. All of these books have a thesis, which is that the general public has to take part in the solutions in any democratic society. It will not be done by experts. And I think that that is a good pointer for us on this question, is how do we bring other people into the game here so that they feel confident about asking questions about the use, design, maintenance. I loved Angelica bringing up the life cycle, shutting down of, either deploying or getting rid of. How do we build into this education packet something to address the real fear that I can speak to of people being scared of doing it wrong, of wanting to step into this arena and maybe not feeling confident or not figuring out how to coalition build because they don't want to do the wrong thing or because they don't have lived experience. So I always think about these things in this tension of the centrality of lived experience, and then how do we not make that an excuse for people not to help grow this movement? And so I think when we're thinking of our educational questions, what can any officer of any institution in any job in any place who has that desire to use a little bit of their courage in their meeting this morning, what questions could they ask that are pretty safe, if you will, that aren't going to like necessarily undo the whole conversation that they're having in their organization, or maybe threaten their livelihood or their job. So I just want to offer that as we're thinking about this, is to try to like think about friction, not only designing, the what do we want instead stuff, but also the how do we design the education of a more broader set of people to participate in shaping AI? Because I think that that community of people is a bit scared, like just a bit scared of making a mistake or doing it wrong. And I'm sure this has been a lifelong issue for everyone participating in these conversations. But I think there's a specific set of questions we could try to think about to help people bring to a table to try to leverage a representative kind of power in service of each other. I think that would be a nice what do we do when we leave? What are the questions people should be asking, rather than what are the compliance standards or the requirements necessarily, just to try to like open this space more so more people feel like they can take part.
Yeah, Peter has the,
Well, I think that says it exactly what the challenge is, and just want to amplify that by saying that's also at the crux of the problem that Yuto laid out at the beginning about AI leaning toward the average. And that's the tension between there's the average, this whole flood of motion of data and thought toward what is average, and then how do we get it to also encourage and enable people to break out from that, because that's who really does it anyways. Without them, then we're just kind of seeding all around to those, those on the, who are on the outside, those with extreme capital and extreme power to push everything back toward the middle, so everyone will remain scared and not speak up. So you're putting it there, say that's what we have to do, and then we have to also figure out how to enable that. Because I see those two things as fundamentally opposed.
Well, I do think that having lots of questions in cases too of like saying, because I keep thinking, how do we, I love sand in the gears. I think right now, even though it's unsatisfying, just throwing sand in the gears of some of the adoption is actually really important in the places where we know it's harmful. And so just asking the kinds of questions about like, what happens when this company gets sold? What are we doing about when this stuff doesn't work? There's no redundancy, there's no human. You think about the approach we've got to date with like the widespread use of email, and you can't contact someone if it's not working, like the free email services. You think of telephone trees where you can't get out of them. There's no zero you can press because it's just basically just hang up. And these standards are so low in terms of who you hold accountable when the systems don't work. And so I think like a win in some of these instances might really just look like holding space, which like when we know there's a harmful use. I think the employment case is a perfect example where we should be really slowing that entire uptake down and like use the fear in counter, which is to put the fear of any, put fear into people who want to use these systems, because it's going to be hard to hold them accountable. So I think it is case dependent a bit. And the other point I wanted to raise, just in response to the agentic conversation, and it speaks a bit to Yuto, which you're talking about with scale, is unfortunately the market driving these technologies means that not only is the casino of capital involved, the worst part is the venture capital, which is nothing has to make money as long as they can say it's widespread use. But in 5-6 years, if there's a dependency created and there's no business model, the floor drops out. I'm sure everyone here has experienced that. So I just also, it's always that like, when there's a new wave, it also comes with like a whole new pile of willingness to do things without getting anything back, because that's the shape of that capital, but it's not longstanding. And so that's just a cautionary note on, is there a localized agentic? Because I loved the thinking. I was like, yes, okay, let's get in this door. Like, what can we do that's beneficial here? But then how do we pull that to the ground in a localized, smaller, mutually accountable, as Angeliko's talking about as well with the water, drink the water where you do industry. And so we all can look to each other and say, is this working? Is it not? Do we change it in maintenance models?
yeah, and if we do invest our time and create dependency within a particular area like agents, we've been experimenting quite a bit with cooperatives. So the cooperative alternative, as opposed to and mutual aid and those sorts of things, where it isn't an extractive large company that we give our time and energy to, but something that is mutually beneficial, and it's a shared resource as opposed to an extracted resource. So is that, I mean, unfortunately, we have, when we talk about ecosystems, you don't hear very much about things like cooperatives, but there are actually quite a few data cooperatives around the world. And there are actually a lot of data cooperatives have come up around areas that are excluded, that are minority areas. So in France, there's a very large data cooperative for people who have rare illnesses, because they are finding that the research systems won't do research on it because there's not enough people. It's too small a group. And pharmaceutical companies and medical supply companies don't invest in it because there are no economies of scale. Research funders won't do it because you can't impact. There is no statistical significance. So what they're growing from the ground up themselves. Is there an opportunity here to salvage what we can from what is offered by the large companies, but do some of our own building within the community that is grounded not necessarily on the technology, but on what we need? And Hannah, you're nodding and you've got a microphone.
Future models.
Right. So we were. So we had in the morning, we sort of talked a little bit about the data issue. Do you give the data impasse, as I call it? Because of course we're pouring our good data into a polluted pool, and our good data is a tiny piece of that polluted pool. So we talked about the trying to clean the ocean. So rather than trying to clean the ocean, can we create or can we clean a small part of the ocean, and so that it's not also fighting against a tsunami of things that are going in the opposite direction? Sorry for all the analogies. But you're right. AI, I mean, intelligence requires the information, but I think so. Yesterday, for those of you who witnessed my response to Carl, this actually makes me very upset quite often, because that is the common narrative here, that the reason why AI doesn't work well for people with disabilities is because there's not enough. There's a data desert here, that we haven't given enough of our data. But what we seem to fail to recognize is, even if we had full proportional representation of our data in the AI, the algorithm would still resort to the it's not. So before we go ahead and do all that effort and throw our lovely data into that polluted pool that is going to go with the average anyways, I think we need to think about other things, like what is the optimization routine? What are the algorithms doing? They're statistical replicators, they're predictive analytics, they are finding the average and predicting based on the average. So it's more than the data, right? And it would be a huge disappointment if we put a lot of effort into the data contribution without thinking about the thing as a whole or what we actually want out of that.
Yeah, if I think this is a good place to make a distinction, and in my pragmatism, it can sometimes sound or is quite instrumentalist, but I think we need to make a distinction here, which is to say, if there's 5 of us in a room and one of us is using a technology that is imperfect, but we have enough contextual trust and understanding that though it is imperfect, it is accomplishing the means to the end, mostly imperfectly. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't all strive for everything working to its best and most equitable case, but there's humans there in the room, that if we're thinking about AI in a communication perspective, there's so many different ways that we communicate. And I'm, a bit out on, I'm trying to give this example because so much of what we're talking about is if there's a misinterpretation. I personally prefer speech when I speak with people, because if I write, I feel like it's just rife with potential misunderstanding, tonally, all over the place, right? But if I talk to someone, there's small iterative back and forth where we can build either a trust, a rapport, a friendly disagreement, an adversarial disagreement, but it's happening at a scale where the technology is not the sole representation of ourselves. I would like to draw a distinction between that and trying to optimize or make that great or whatever, with something where you've got a system acting as a proxy, where who you are, how you exist, what you've done in the world, you're not there. You're being represented in a proxy manner for a particular context of either a decision being made, a representation, something else. Those to me are 2 very different contexts. And I think that some of the work we need to do as people together right now is so dependent on communications that we might be best an instrumentalist in some ways, that when there is trust, we muddle through in the same ways that we don't say the perfect words. I say stupid things all the time. I step in it constantly, and I make mistakes. And sometimes I know I make mistakes with people who can take it, and some it's really unfair that I put the mistake of my speech on them. That is never going to get resolved in a technical manner. That's so much about being human, right? So I think we need to be careful as to which context we can actually even address, and remember what the standard is that is not what AI is doing and how we communicate, because communication is rife with error prior to the advent of the internet. I mean, that's sort of the nature of language. And I don't mean to like throw us into that's a big philosophical opening, but that is a different situation than the proxy situation where you are not there and the data is being used in a representational manner. And I think intervening on the proxy situations is where you have to be very sand in the gears, because even if it's working well today, if it's not working in 3 months or 5 years, you're going to have a hell of a time getting people doing that work again. And so that's why I am bearish on technical solutions to like human authority, autonomy, agency. Like we need to protect and expand the places where people make decisions with and for each other. And so I just want to like throw that out in case that distinction is beneficial, because I think so much of the upside of some of these tools is, and tell me if I'm wrong, but like feels like it's living some more in the communications realm. And I don't want to muddle that with what is often so harmful in the proxy representation. And there's not a perfect, this is not, those things cross over. But I hope when I'm giving the example that I might be like helping us think a bit about which cases we're really trying to hone in on for making AI work for people, or where it doesn't actually, like would never work well. And you never want AI to do something. And where I am working on that all the time is with fiduciary responsibility, like a lawyer. You never want your lawyer to be an AI, ever. Doesn't matter how great that whole technology is, it is not the circumstance you ever want to work toward. So, and you can get into the ethics of, well, what if it's that, or you don't have a lawyer? Then I think we're really slipping into a bad construct. So I think we have to just keep these different contexts in mind as we talk about which places we're trying to build something that works better, and which places it might be straight up refusal, and which places we have to be pragmatic on how good it's ever going to be. Because I do think communication is a bit of a disaster show without AI.
you're alluding to this area or concern of skill atrophy. And we're already seeing that quite a bit. I participated in a community college discussion, and academic institutions at the moment are in financial crisis. And one of the discussions was, what do we no longer need as a program? And unfortunately, I think it's going in exactly the opposite direction of what we need. So they're doubling down on the STEM subjects. They're also getting rid of things like, well, in Ontario, a program on ASL interpretation, a program on, there is this narrative at the moment, we no longer need accessibility services or accommodation services because the AI will do that. And then I went to a HR conference, and what they were saying, well, we no longer need these accommodations because I know several blind people who can do all of this with an AI. So I mean, there's some very practical, real world examples of this already happening.
Anecdotes are not data.
Right, exactly. Well, and yeah, that's the other problem, of course, that all of the harms, because of the diversity of the harms, are seen as anecdotal and insignificant. The risk, I mean, even NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, which the Biden administration had given the executive order to, were basing their AI protections on a risk-benefit framework. And when we brought up a number of the risks related to disability, and this is before this administration, they were saying, well, that's just anecdotal, that's statistically insignificant. And so it doesn't need to be taken into account in a risk-benefit framework.
Well, of course, it's statistically significant. As you said, the challenge is.
Yeah.
What industry the HR conference was in? If it was specific to an industry, or was it?
It was for a headhunter firm that was doing large competitive hiring. So where there would be over 1,000 applications, et cetera. Oh, no, I just put a poll on.
No,
Didn't-
no, I want to offer something from the democracy lens, just because I sometimes stop and like have a hard time with where we are, I think, culturally, so in a liberal democracy, so unaware of consensus being a myth, right? Like I've told people, when you run a public meeting, if you have 200 people walk out and they all kind of go, oh God, I guess I can live with that. That's what success looks like. That is a good meeting. And I think that there's something to be said as we're trying to consider, how do we, again, I keep going back to the question, how do we shape AI? How do we, like this article that was mentioned earlier that Adrian wrote about, like the patterns, and we're just sort of getting trapped in the past of these patterns when we know we need anti or counter patterns. How we do this education in a way that pluralistic notion of like, different cases. It's not that there's one egregious harm and then we mitigate and then, okay, those ones are a bit less bad, but like this hierarchical thought is so deeply entrenched in this culture that we live in. And I just say that, like, to me, there's so much that is on offer by saying like AI has to do this and this and this and this, like the idea that it's not one requirement or one harm or whatever. So I just think even in this glacial pace of, getting always working on justice in this education is to not replicate the idea that we can get these systems working well for everyone. It's more like, how do we have different systems, plural? How do we have different versions of things? Like, I think just making sure that we don't double down on the notion that there's some utopian techno-solutionist road out of here, because that's already so deeply entrenched in the culture. Like, I just feel sometimes I have to tell people, you have to live with people that not only do you disagree, they don't want you to be here. but also no one's going anywhere. And so I think like we just have to keep remembering that we don't have a good, I would say, and this gets back to culture of fear too. I know these are soft, but I think they're relevant. We don't have a lot of practice in disagreeing or working through friction or working through conflict. And so these systems always are trying to smooth that. And I think it's right at that point where we need a bit more friction. But we, like I'm saying all of this because to me, we have much higher order non-technical problems that we're trying to answer this question in. So however we can continue to support education, both within, intra-community and outside, to make sure that we're being expansive and thinking about redundancy and thinking about like, okay, if you use the AI for this, cool. And if you don't, who's investing in the labor piece? Like, what are we doing around the technology? I offer this because I continually feel like it's so tempting to fall into the idea that we can engineer solutions here when like, I think it's everything that's around it is in long crisis. So I think these are just factors,
Yeah, back in 2009, I wrote something called The Valley of the Unpopular, because of course it's reducing our comfort with dissonance. And you can see it the most there's a Piagetian stage where kids in their teenage years and the college years should experience dissonance. But of course, there we have the social media personalization, what other people like you like, the hierarchy of popularity that is shielding us and winnowing our exposure to just that, working through disagreements, living with people who are different and have different opinions. But we have Randy, who has probably far more interesting things.
I don't think that's, but putting my incident hat on, whole idea. There's this idea of socio-technical systems. And we tend to think of systems as just the technology, whatever that is. But the technology always falls apart, right? The technology always has trouble. And it's the human beings that keep the technology running. You can look this up, I don't want to bore you with some of the other details, but addressing the socio piece of that, I agree, is probably the most important. And resonating more and more with me is, what are the sand in the gear questions that we can arm people with to ask? Because a year ago with LLMs, today it's agentic, who the hell knows what it's going to be in 6 months? But I think if we can give people a set of, I don't know, 10 to 20 questions, depending on where we can throw that sand in and sort of build that idea of community. I know I said a lot here, but I think that's something tangible that people can use to communicate. If you give people 100 questions, that's hard. But I also wanted to acknowledge it's socio-technical systems, not just technical systems. So the socio part, I think I agree, is where we can try to work here for the most part.
That's great. And that can definitely be added to our action list. What are the questions that people should be asking?
I think what I would like to offer there is, I don't know who framed it, but I'm not sure if we fully understand that we are basically investing in the system of ignorance and how expensive that will be. I mean, residing in a financial economy tech space right now, but we don't give numbers to that versus what we are hoping to do here to invest in diversity and society at large, because as was it Randy said, the technology will fail us eventually or somehow, but that's never part of the cost analysis. I'm not sure if maybe reframing these averaging systems as equating them with ignorance, we are ignoring so many facets, so many people. Is like, can we cost that out and then can we counter this argument to say, hey, this is why we need to build systems with flexibility, because they will become much more resilient. They will serve much more people and so forth. Yes, the work is slower, but we can go farther, hopefully together. Few things to offer here without solutions. Again, which is what I find really hard in these discussion rooms. And I'd love to go back to Bianca's suggestion. What are the questions that we are hoping to ask? Do people know where they find community to create these spaces of responsible and reciprocal AI that we want to have? I'm not sure where I would go to in Austin, for example. I might know where I would go and connect here in Toronto, but maybe that would be an opportunity for everyone to add to the notebook. What are places that you know you can do this cooperative alternative work, just to add maybe to the parking lot of the nodes that we have.
Yeah, and this is a great point. I mean, you're one of the reframing the discussion that we have about it from intelligence to ignorance. I think that's a great point that you're making. When we think about the data, or when I think about the data plot that we created, 80% of the knowledge space is unexplored and unknown, and AI, and that's the space that we occupy. So if our goal is, I mean, if it's supposedly that knowledge or truth or understanding is the goal, then this is a gold mine of the things that have not actually been considered at the moment.
I have to, now I'm going to lean heavy into provocateur and just say that I think we're ignoring things on purpose to cope. And that's for some, but I just want to like bring us all the way out to spirituality again. Like there's a book by Joanna Macy called World as Lover, World as Self. And her work is helping people deal with climate collapse and the grief that comes with climate collapse. And I was listening to her speak the other day, and this was a recording, so she must be in her 90s, if she's still alive. But she was talking about how with COVID, suddenly it was like this spotlight through death numbers of how the elderly were, and how they were living, how people in jails were living, how people working in meat processing plants were working. And it was this like real expose of things that had been pushed out of view in order to exist in some ways. Like for some, it's an active avoidance. So I just want to counter this by saying like, yes, to the ignorance framing, I love it. And also I think this avoidance, we are living in deep avoidance culture. And so how do we not refuse that truth? And I think, and this kind of comes back to with disability justice, I know a lot of people themselves are countering their own sense. Are they comfortable saying they're disabled, or that they have accessibility issues? Like there's all these different layers of how our relationships with ourselves, with each other are evolving, adapting, learning. And I think people, there are sufferings. I think this is why it matters to go to localized control, is that these things, back to the Rochelle's overwhelm point, it just feels like, what am I supposed to do about this? So I do think like that construct, we can't shove it out of frame, that like we're working from the edge of a really precarious and brittle like baseline culture that we're like everything's built around avoiding how we have everything that we have, right? This is all in globalization, like it's every chicken is coming home to roost here. And so, yeah, I just like, I love the framing, and then I'm like, yeah, but that's on purpose. So then what do we do if we don't want to feel or know or see or deal with the mess? But I do think that is the crux. That is the crux of the challenge, is how do we turn this from, oh, I'm scared, I don't want to engage with it, to like, oh no, there's benefit, there's an incentive here. I want to get involved in this. I want to bring back the courage and the purpose and the small scale morality, because I do think we have to like be able to tango with these things in a way that like, or at least be able to talk about morality and spirituality, like these pieces of what it is to be human, are the things that are going to incentivize us to move, because it's not going to be capital. Capital's interest in justice is 0, 0, 0, 0. So like we really do have to lean into where we have agency and authority outside of that model. This is what it made me think of. But like to just really, I think goes back also to the socio-technical, why the socio is the caps lock part for me, is that that's where the power is. I don't think we have power in the technical side of this equation in a lot of places. I really don't.
And Wendy, you've just joined it. You had something like that you were talking about. Any thoughts on our challenge?
I don't know, Bianca. I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I popped in late. I don't think I can really articulate this yet. So I need to talk about someone. I just feel what you're talking about though, it just reminded me of reading The Service Berry by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And so the I don't know, capital's interest in justice is 0. I'm just going to reiterate what you said, and I will be back.
And Wendy's background is related to capital.
It's Microsoft for 11 years. And before that, I was at W3C for 11 years. So, and then I've been away from all of this for the last 3, reading a lot and just kind of, this is my first foray back into accessibility stuff in 3.5 years, because now is a good time to get back involved and stuff. But I believe in a way that is not like we've done it before, basically.
Yeah.
We gotta agree on everything.
So we
I
were,
think
yeah. Go ahead. Yes.
I think back to sand in the gears and the questions, they're not necessarily mainstream questions, but I think accessibility itself is sand in the gears. And
Mhm.
that's what happens when you say, wait, what about me, or what about this group? We want access to this information and this, or this, actually this social set, whether it's technology or people. That's why I talk about social accessibility. That's the sand that slows the machine down for sure. And why there's so much push against it, what, back to AI. Oh, you don't have to worry about that, we've got AI, solve the problem. Not so fast.
And I just want to acknowledge that there's a personal wear and tear of being the person, as everyone here knows, that's like, it's the, you know, in organizations, they're like, oh God, I don't want to talk to ethics. I don't want to talk to compliance. Like, oh, here comes Bianca with her thing about accessibility. Like, that's a real human cost when we're talking about the day-to-day life of working in an organization, because I appreciate people that do fantastic work in in for-profit business, but it's the incentive that lives deep and behind any one particular business or set of people. So the day-to-day of having to be the one where people are like, oh, here's the sand person. How do we reorganize that a bit? Because it's not an easy incentive to be that person, you know, like there's nothing that way when people just want to just, oh God, here she comes with the thing again. I think this is so not representative of the joy of being in good community with people doing hard work. You know, like I think like that's just another cultural component as we're looking at our list of questions and as we're imagining what this work looks like on a day-to-day basis. I don't like toxic utopian, like, oh, we're all going to have fun fighting the resistance will be a blast. Like, I don't think that's it either. But there is something very real about having to be perceived as the police. And it's so against my politics, but I know that I have been that person before, and it's tiring, right? So I think that's where we also maybe when we're thinking about questions, is think about roles, because I've thought only recently, I mentioned this to Yuta, if you put accessibility as the driver of any public consultation in a city, it would be brilliant. It would be brilliant, but it's not done that way. It's done that we have a siloed meeting about accessibility in the city, and that is not getting us to the good place. So how do we also incrementalize the question asking and the labor doing, so it's not all on the accessibility person, that it's shared, that every person has to have a vested interest in this work, and how do you make it rhyme with their current role? Because this is also where it's like, you don't have to learn a net new thing. I tell people, you don't have to like reinvent your whole personality because you're getting into politics. Like, that's a bad idea. You got to do the bloom from where you're planted, right? So as we're thinking productively about the questions and the work, let's be real about what organizational design looks like and how we leverage that infrastructure, so that we're not working in these atomized little communities struggling uphill with resistance. How do we share the work, I think is another piece of the thinking that I'd love to riff on a bit in our writing and our like outcomes from the session.
Wendy here. I have been wondering, talking about how exhausting it is to convince other people to do the right thing. Is that where we should keep putting our energy? You know, like, can we just build cool shit and stop trying to convince other people to do it for us?
Okay.
I agree. Waiting for empathy is over for me. Waiting for other people's empathetic responses, or to be included in meetings that would get somewhere, was just like a waste of time. And yeah. You can spend lots of time trying to relate to them and like show what could happen or why to care or how to be an ally. But at the end of the day, they won't remember you in the actual decision-making meeting, and they don't really want to because they're scared.
Just gonna break my neck nodding here, because this is real. Like, this is it.
Who wants to make something?
And unfortunately, I think with all, we know, emergent signals and movements, there is a big delay that we have to acknowledge and contend with. So whatever we are doing now will maybe, ripple through and show an effect, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years later, hopefully, maybe not, we don't know. But it's also countering the attention economy that we are in, and having that breath and holding that endurance and acknowledging this is a delay space, but it is a space. I don't know, might be comforting or not, but I just wanted to point to this amazing book by Hospice in Modernity by Vanessa Machado de Oliveira, and I find it's a great read, and some of the questions that she is posing, she's not giving any answers after each of the chapters, might be also some questions that we may want to engage and grapple with, because we are in a moment, I think, and we all feel it. Things are changing. We need to turn things, but there's also this big void somehow. Technocratic doesn't work anymore. We are grappling with, what do we now build? We don't have necessarily anything to default to, and we are surrounded by these hyper objects. I think Timothy, was it? Philosopher Timothy Timothy, anyway, I put it in the chat once I find him, calls it, that is so hard to deal with climate change, with social justice, because they are such large topics. It's really hard to tie or find our ties into them. But I think what we are stating, hoping for is, yes, this tie is community, but we are fragmented and we are caught in the binary space of this party, that party. Technology, not technology, but the truth is actually in the gray, muddly middle. And we are not comfortable in that space anymore, maybe because the binary is so much easier, right? In a complex world.
And the formulaic, the listicles, yeah. Randy has wanted to say something.
I have a feeling I'm gonna get parking lotted. The challenge, and I agree with Wendy, I think it was kind of, accessibility is not my full-time job anymore. Hasn't been for some time, but I find ways to make the difference that I can despite that. Wish it was my full-time job. That's a whole other conversation, but just building solutions and finding a way to fight, I agree with, but not everybody are open source coders. So how do you bring the rest of that community along with you? I haven't put hands on a keyboard in some time. Probably be a decent tester. This is probably a parking lot item, but you know, how do we go about it logistically? Yes, question.
Yeah, which brings us circle back to the accessibility of the tools.
Yeah, and I was going to say that this might be a just that because of the depth of agreement with the point of like you can't make other people have an empathy that like if they're not interested, it's the horse to water, right? Like it's I think there's something in the moment to the optimism I have in this consciousness discussion, even though a lot of it is nonsense about what's human, what's machine. Is this a human thing? Is this machine? Can machine do this? Like, can a machine be a human? Like, this is a little bit silly in some of its variants, and then dangerous because people in power are really going with it and for it in a religious style. And where this comes to me, I have a morbid fascination with the moderate. In the political spectrum of actors, the moderate is the one that has always been like, they're holding so much space, they don't do anything, they're not super politically active, they're status quo enabling, they look kind of progressive, but they don't ever do it enough for anything to move. And I think there's this potential intersection, and I'm delusional about this, so this might be till I'm dead myself, of instead of, it's like a seeing each other in each other. So rather than convincing someone that someone else has value for difference, it's seeing like the humanity that is, oh, these are all things that we value and want to protect about. And I know it's a little silly of the like us versus the machines, but that thematically is pushing into public discourse in a way that I have never heard with other technologies that I've worked with. I talk to people and they bring up AI and I'm like, wow, this is out there, this is real. And I think some of that is ChatGPT. But I say this because I think it addresses that question of, rather than looking for empathy or understanding or whatever else, it's more like the commonality push of things that, yeah, of like things that we all want to protect in our humanity. And that to me has a much bigger surface area and is more plausible because it's got a self-interest component that looking for emotions other people just aren't willing to feel or interested in feeling doesn't. So there's a pragmatism in there. So I'm trying to like, this might be me trying to silver lining something that's been driving me a little around the bend for a long time. But I'm offering that because I do think it's more toward a constructivist politics that is inclusive rather than people feeling they're doing something good on behalf of someone else, which I think we can all agree is not really happening.
Yeah, and that's one of the premises of, I started a graduate program in inclusive design, and what I had to sell the university on was we want radical diversity within this group. We do not want the best and the brightest. We want as much experience as possible in dealing with struggle, in dealing with barriers that people have experienced. And by virtue of giving space to this diversity, we find a deeper commonality. And it sounded like this sort of hokey philosophical thing, but through every cohort, there comes this moment where people say, whoa, you know, I hated you right at the beginning. I so disagreed with you. But we've reached a point where we've all invested in this struggle, and there's a bond and an understanding that deep down we have the same needs, we have the same requirements, and we have the same interests at a larger macro level, but also at a very intimate human level. But, yes.
I'm going to step back. And kind of dive into the practice. So I'm executive director to this nonprofit. And we started out about 6.5 years ago trying to figure out how do we get community to get companies, what's with money, how do we actually get community to get study. And it's been kind of a grappling effort, and a lot of people are joining right now, which has been crazy. I went from 6 people coming every month or two, to like 30 or 40 every month.
That's great.
But just coming down into the really practical, we had to step way back, because our first question was a really big question: how do we get people to engage? And one is accessibility. And when we talked to the business owners, when we talked to the small groups, they were like, we'd like to, sure. How do we do it? We don't have time. We barely are surviving. What we're going to do with that? And then they were like, and when we get there, how do we reach people with disabilities? It goes back to what you were saying earlier. We are a community, but we are also diverse. And so separate and going silos in some ways. But it's hard for us as a community to come together. My disability is chemical, but to be dramatically different than someone who's still sharing experience, someone has already needs. So how do we bond to make change? So just to get practically, the first thing I had to do was create a platform we could all talk and work on that was accessible. That was really impossible to come up with a collaborative project. We didn't build things from scratch. Then the next thing we had to do was build a repository that was fully accessible to all our volunteers with disabilities to be able to create content. Then we had to define disability. Can you speak a little bit? Okay, then we had to define disability and like a broad thing. So we had to create an entire framework defining and specifying what we mean by disability, which led to the digital accessibility framework talking about on Thursday, which looks at disability holistically. And now we're finally piloting this program of putting something out in one little community to try to create that change. Right, and have those conversations. And I just walked through that because we kind of touched on it, but it is, you got to build infrastructure to be able to even make communication. And it is so difficult. And it's also really difficult to get funding. Because it's different, it's new, and it's not sexy. And so that has been another huge challenge. So just kind of raise that. And if anybody wants to try something like we're kind of talking about, please give me a call. Even if we fail, I'd love to give you all our lessons learned so we can skip the first 7 years and jump right ahead to the next.
Well, so how do we find you? Do we just Google you?
We're just looking up the community that works.
But what you're saying is really what
Microphone.
John was saying, which is accessibility. Sorry, thank you. What you're saying is, that's what Bianca said, and what I said many times. Accessibility is the driver from this card. And yes, you're building maybe a prototype. Whether you're building a building or technology or whatever, accessibility isn't driving the construction. It doesn't have to be the only thing, but it has to be part of it. And that's true with AI. Let's not forget, we're talking about AI here. It's, sure. Then it's going to fail. It's the fact that it will fail. There's no accessibility isn't one of the reasons for it to exist and part of the platform that holds it up. So thanks for building the prototype. Please share it.
Well, the group is accessible community. We literally
Microphone, sorry. No, wait, a microphone, so.
So the prototype's not out publicly yet, but we're beta testing within our community, so you try it out, but you can follow us at accessiblecommunity.org or LinkedIn, but just reach out to me again. I'm saying this because I think those foundations are so important for what we're talking about with AI. I think as we think about that and we drive that understanding that leveling up and having to build with the key point I was attempting to make there. And again, happy to share with us.
So how do people join your community?
If you can just volunteer and join, but.
Pretty quick.
Moema, you've been on camera. I wonder if you had something that you wanted to contribute.
Hi again. Yeah, I turned on a while ago and sorry and forgot. Sorry. I don't have anything like very specific. Like there's so much information and ideas coming up that are so interesting, and I feel like I'm a little fragmented with all my thoughts right now. But one thing that I have been questioning or like wondering ever since we started talking is the idea that at the end, it feels that it always goes back to how it is so hard to do anything in the way to better all the things we're talking, or to be to create systems that could work when we are working under a system that it's very clear and strong and has its own interests. And I don't want to sound like a but yeah, capitalism, right? Like it's navigating this while trying to do everything else. And it really resonated with me what Bianca was saying about the ideas of trying to create flexible systems, different ones, plural. And also there was one more thing through that thought that made me think that maybe that can be a way of within the system that I think it stops us so much to, at least me, right? I don't want to say for everyone, but like we get stuck through this wall of like trying small, trying big, trying my workplace, trying to with one colleague, or trying the whole place, and people having different understandings, and then you get to this bigger wall. But thinking of this plurality and flexibility kind of opens up, I think, a little bit the possibilities of how to at least start approaching. Because also I think at least here in the US right now, I can see a lot of another fear, like coming from COVID, and then now a little after getting into this new government. I think there are other fears that go beyond. It's like even afraid of sending. I also agree with the idea it's always better talk a lot of the times, because messages can be misunderstood through text and stuff. But also, like, can we put anything in a message, right? I see a lot of these discussions around us, especially like we work with the state college. So like all these things now added to like, and is this technology, so there is a lot of willingness to try and figure it out and talk, but there's also all this fear that it's what they want. So you can't give in, but at the same time, there are people in different situations that can have very serious consequences depending on what you say. Anyway, there's so much, I don't want to be rambling, but a lot of it, resonated, and I want to look through it all and bring to our team too, to figure it out how we can, I don't know, like expand a little bit in the way of seeing everything and not feeling overwhelmed. Because also there is a lot of, like you're all saying, that if there's any discussion of accessibility, it's like, oh, go talk to the accessibility office. And it's like, we can't expect that they don't understand our work group here. How can we talk about it too, but then people don't feel knowledgeable enough? And how can we start this discussion? How can we provide resources? I also don't feel I'm very nervous talking right now, because I'm like, I feel like, I don't understand much, but I want to, and I'm informing. So how we bring this to smaller groups that we can together build a safer place for exploration, even of how we can,
Yeah, I really admire putting words to those feelings, because they're just coursing throughout everything at the moment. And I think there's this saying that I don't like at all, which is that political change happens through crisis or scandal, which I hate. Like I can say with a depth that seems like such a, like, can't we get it together proactively? But so just as an emergent piece of hope in exactly the context you're describing, there is this minute action daily where you just start to figure out, okay, if this is like if this, and believe me, long crisis, for some it's only been crisis for hundreds of years. This is not saying suddenly we're in a crisis, but how you operate in context specific, in how you move, how you write, what you don't, who you speak to, who you don't, how all of this goes together, is the sort of the unwritten, where you say, no, we're going to protect humanity, we're going to protect each other, and we're going to figure this out. I think sometimes it's hard for us to believe that when we're all rowing in the same direction, or moving in the same direction, or thinking in the same direction, or feeling in the same direction, you have to trust that other people are doing it too, even if you don't talk to them or speak to them or know what they're doing. Because I do think you need a humility about how expansive or collaborative some of this work is, because sometimes it doesn't make sense to try to scale some of it. It really doesn't. And I think that's a bit countercultural, because we're always looking for these universalizing, okay, this is the way, and then we do. It's like this example that was being spoken of, how much learning is in the process of the doing. That's never funded if you can be lucky enough to get the object funded. The interest in the process is so difficult to put any capitalist, bracketing around. So I say this with the hopefulness. I'll just share the little anecdote of reading, talk about COVID, long COVID, like activists that I've read their writing about their fatigue, and that they can't just join a Zoom meeting for X amount of time, and that they have to like be tempering pace and how much activity. And reading and sharing some of that work with others, the relief they felt about the suggestion of slowing down in the face of crisis was immense. And these are not people who would consider themselves impacted by chronic fatigue nor anything else. Just saying, you have permission to slow down, even when everything feels like it's on fire. That might be the most important time to go slower and be thoughtful and be present, and like not think you have to do. And I think this also speaks to the book that Angelica recommended, of like actually just hold on a minute, because then you deepen the relations of the people with whom you need to interact in these difficult contexts. So I offer that as a little bit of hopefulness, because I'm so appreciative of you sharing that, because I feel all of those feelings, and I can feel that it's the water and the air and it's all around us, but we still got to figure it out. And so I think we just also have to, I think humility is a pretty important piece of this puzzle.
It's Monica, and working inside corporations the last number of years, the conversation, the direction was always, you need to talk about it. You need to go out and you need to talk about accessibility. You need to change the dialogue on disability. You need to be very present, and present in many, many different forms. But this fear now is causing people to abandon that strategy. So what's going to replace it? And what both of you, Moima and Bianca, are saying, I think is really powerful. Because when I've talked to people who are doing accessibility inside corporations right now, especially in the States, I said, well, how are you managing this? And said, we're still doing it. We're just not talking about it. But if you're not talking about it, then how are you going to make your work visible? How are you going to get the executive support that you need? How are you going to show that you're having impact? And so this dampening of the ability to have an opinion is, we haven't replaced it with anything yet. And what might we do and what strategies?
This is a very maybe disruptive method, but you could try to actually call in to a a shareholder meeting, like in the earnings call, and ask a question regarding accessibility and get it like literally in the transcript. And make the executives look.
Yeah, actually Sharon was, Sharon was part, and Sharon just joined us. We've been talking about meaningful resistance, right? And that's definitely a strategy for meaningful resistance. Randy, you have.
I actually did that once. I'm not gonna say, I'm not, it's a little bit different, but I'm not gonna say the name of the company. It is an assistive technology company, but I'm not gonna say it. They had an open forum kind of thing, and I called and I said, I would love to buy one of your widgets. I'm gonna be careful here. I'd love to buy one of your widgets, but I can't access the page. Do you have any plans to address that kind of thing? So it is a way of doing it. I still don't know if that site is accessible because I never bought a widget from that company, but it is an approach and I did use it once. I did know that. Yeah, in the meeting, the manager said, yeah, we've got to do a better job with that. Did he actually do a better job? Well, you know, I had other places to go buy my widgets, but I should check that. But he did respond, but it was a decent response. He said I have to do a better job. I knew some folks who worked in support of that company and didn't like that, so it was a bit of a plant on a Zoom call, but it can be done. So.
And the best tech reporters call into earnings calls. So to the point that was made of putting it on the transcript, having a persistent visibility of questions that way for tech reporters to hear, I think is part of this long arc of education too, which is great.
Wendy, it's good.
I appreciate the part about resting. I'm coming out of a 3-year rest after pushing really hard for 30 plus. And so I think my thoughts are kind of all over the place, but what is kind of resonating, and this may not necessarily be AI either, but you know, I remember my very first CSUN conference in, I don't know when that was, 98, 97, something like that. And I was talking about HTML, and I remember someone in an audience at a disability conference was like, alt text, what's that? Does that have something to do with the alt key on the keyboard? And at the time I was just like, oh, furious, right? Cut to a few weeks ago, I go to an organizing committee for my local Democratic Party, and I was not the one bringing up this system. And there was a whole ongoing conversation about it. And so I think as cynical as I'm feeling right now, I'm also feeling incredibly hopeful, because by stepping away for 3 years and just seeing the community from a distance and not knowing hardly anybody, like I only know a few people even in this room, you know? And so the growth and the impact may not feel like much sometimes when you're in it, but having stepped back, so much has changed in 30 years. And even though we've got someone with a pen making all these sweeping statements, there's still so much that has changed. There's still so many more people who are employed who have disabilities. Having worked at Microsoft for 11 years, it was fascinating to see the push to get more people with disabilities in the room making decisions. So I'm still feeling incredibly cynical, because despite that, there were some really frustrating decisions made at that company, which is part of why I stepped away. But it's also why I reemerge now, because we are at an incredible inflection point where we have an opportunity to do things differently and move forward differently, given how many more people we have and how much more awareness and the stories that have been told. You know, it's hard to hear that people aren't telling as many stories now, but the fact that Microsoft did a Super Bowl commercial, right? You know what I mean? Like there's the storytelling and the consciousness around inclusion has shifted a lot. And even though there are many people destroying much of what we worked for the last 30 years, we're still all here. And so how, you know, there's kind of an exciting moment. And I really am energized by Carl's talk last night. I'm not fully sure how to articulate that yet, but just the talk about speaking bluntly about things. I absolutely loved how, swear words and all, what he was saying. So I don't know how that adds to anything, but rest is absolutely important, and rest is resistance in a lot of ways right now. And it's so important to, I guess the one last thing I'll say and then I'll shut up, is that more now than ever, understanding how truth feels in each of our own bodies, I think is a real key to what's next. And I think that's a lot of what I've focused on the last 3 years, is just getting away from my technology and really focusing on what I am feeling and doing, and just really caring for myself, and then being able to come back now, having rested, with a clearer and different perspective. And I think that recharge is absolutely key, especially in these really rough times. We're going to need all the resources in the
Yeah, Aubrey Lois said something like rest is or self-care is a political act.
Yeah.
And to the political moment, I just want to offer that I have, because I've worked in public engagement for so long, that I kind of, this idea, we've got very lofty ideals of democracy and they're abstract. And then you look at with the pragmatism of how people want to practice it. And a lot of the time it's not active. It's great until something's not working. And so I just want to say that I do believe the enthusiasm for technology, when it's a genuine opportunity that is in this community, is incredibly appealing to people who do not want to be critical of technology. And there is a large percentage of the population who just want to be like, you know what? There's something good in here. I'm not willing to go down that road. So I think I just offer that as another little ray of sunshine to me, which is that the enthusiasm I hear, because it's for real benefit. And it is not just, oh, we're doing opportunities and risks from people where it's like that opportunity is not an equitable opportunity. Here, a thoughtful opportunity has a lot more carriage than I think we may be cognizant of, because there's an appetite for something else in the general political environment, where people are like, I don't want to do my politics like that, and I don't want to do them like that, and so I'm not participating. And this is that moderate and many others that are just not engaged. And so I just find that quite encouraging, as to when I hear the enthusiasm here, that you can actually run out the door with like, no, these are like, look, if we want to route this way, there is some of this where you don't have to feel like you're being anti-innovation or anti-progress, because those are powerful things that people will not want to identify as. I've run around that track many times. Like, it is not, people are not interested for the most part in critiquing a lot of technology. That's just unfortunately the truth.
Right. And Rob is very eager to say something, and then I'm going to tell an
What I want
analogy.
to piggyback off that comment on how the truth feels in each of us. This reminds me of a comment I made back during my bachelor's program. I told the instructor, I said, "You'll never understand us unless you're one of us." Speaking as a member of the disability community myself, multiple disabilities, vision loss, and mild cerebral palsy. And I say that because you can talk about it until you're blue in the face, but unless you experience it, you won't truly know what it's like. And even for those of us that do testing who may not ourselves have a disability, some of you, we could just, switch off the screen reader, switch up, go back to having full vision. And for me, I've lived my entire life with just having vision in one eye. So I personally feel, that's why I said earlier, lived experience. I feel there's no greater asset. We're also down to the wire here, I think 5 minutes.
Right. I wanted to the point that Bianca just made regarding the people looking for optimism, looking for an alternative that is not evil or well, she wasn't that strong, but I just want to tell one quick anecdote. We during in 2009, 2010, we created, or we helped to develop these accessibility standards for Canada, and the government was wondering, how do we get the capitalists on board? That's not how they said it, but that was, so what we suggested was that we get the most fiscally and socially conservative research tank in Ontario to work with us to see what the impact would be of full accessibility within the province. I mean, we didn't really define what full accessibility or greater accessibility within the province. And their outcome, I mean, initially they were saying, oh yeah, I mean, this is a quick dismiss because we'll find that it's far too costly. But the interesting thing was that after about 2 weeks of delving into and doing economic modeling on this, they said, this is an investment with no risks. This is the best investment that there is. There are no negative outcomes. There are no negative environmental outcomes. There's no other group that will be hurt. And so if we're going to invest our monies, this is the best way. And they actually showed increases in GDP, increases in a number of things. I wonder if there's some way to recruit or to trick because I think there are amazing economic arguments there are amazing academic arguments, and I feel a lot of guilt in being in academia, because of course academia is where much of the reductionism has come from, and the gold standard of statistical reasoning being the one and only thing that would allow for promotion and funding and the determination of truth. Academia has a lot to blame for, but I think that the area of the space that we have and the arguments that we need to make and what we're advocating for is something that, unlike many other things that are being argued for, really doesn't have downsides. It has macro upsides, it has micro upsides. Disability is one of the most predictable things that we all experience. It is to some extent universal, despite the fact that we all experience it differently. So I want to sort of end on a somewhat positive note. And also Jean pointed out that Angelica added a whole bunch of questions that we can ask that when we are putting those sand in the gears.
And can you copy them into the notebook?
Yeah.
Because we can't get it off of Zoom.
Yes, I'll do that. I'm actually in the process of building a bibliography of the references that were stated. Please, but I don't have them fully. Please add to it. But yes, the links are there already, and I'm going to copy the questions over right now. Thank you.
So what happens? What happens next? So we've got these resources and everything. We stay in touch. Are we going to join your community that you've already built for Accessible Canada? Are we going to join this to that? Are we going to maintain separate channels?
No, I think we should join them together. Definitely.
Yeah, hoping
yeah, strength in numbers. Yes. And so the notebooks will remain open, and we will continue to contribute to them. What we're going to do is we're going to try to do a synthesis of where we arrived at, especially drawing out the what next. What do we do next? What are the next steps, both from a short-term and a long-term perspective? Last year's Accessible Canada, Accessible World pieces, a whole variety of different things happened. People got together and decided to form a collaborative and apply for funding to pursue things further. There were proposals put forward to both all levels of government regarding a variety of actions and activities. There are groups that are building shit, as you said, which so we had a whole bunch of different things, and they weren't necessarily, you know, one large unified thing, but many things came from it. So we'll keep the notebooks. Everybody who signed up is joining this group, and we'll put it together with the Accessible Canada, Accessible World, because I think we do have to cross national boundaries too. This nationalism that is there at the moment is really quite counterproductive to what we want to do.
Study you mentioned where you.
Wait, Peter, just a moment.
Yeah.
Is that fine?
Is the study you mentioned that the fiscally conservative, socially conservative group undertook with?
Yeah, it's called Releasing Constraints. You can and there's another set to that. I'll put that in the notebook.
Great, thank you.
And just as another note, I recently spoke to the World Bank, and they now have a group on social justice, a social justice fund or whatever, where countries can choose to actually contribute or not. And unfortunately, I mean, not all World Bank members are contributing, but there are a growing number that are, because I think at this moment we're at, people are mobilizing. It's nasty and awful, but it's also triggering, it's shocking people into doing something. So they want to replicate it on a global level. The economic modeling was in just Ontario, but they want to do a version of that that considers international issues. And of course, the World Bank is one of those usually fiscally conservative groups do that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, well, we are 2 minutes over time. And sorry, it's only 2 minutes this time, not 4 minutes like during our break. So we're getting better. And so I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation, and hopefully, yes. Oh, yeah. Okay, can we review the parking lot? Who has the notebook open?
I do.
Okay, great.
Where do we go to find community? Where do we go to find community to create spaces of responsible reciprocal AI work? How to bring along the open source community.
Oh, yeah, right. Definitely. And so those are some of the questions that hopefully will continue to the conversation regarding. I think 11:45 was when we were supposed to stop because it's lunchtime, right?
For lunch. Yesterday, we ran out of food for the volunteers and the staff because they're always told to wait for later. So today, if you fall into the category of volunteer or staff, there's a whole separate buffet line set up dedicated to y'all down in the cafeteria where we had breakfast. And then instructors and attendees go upstairs to the ballroom.
Okay.
So nobody has to wait. Everybody can get their lunch. And then the keynote talk is also in Ragsdale, but on another floor.
And thank you so much, everybody, for your wonderful contributions.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Christiana, if you would like.
And thank you, Bianca, thank you, Angelica, and thank you, Moema, for
Thank you so much. This is so wonderful.